Mr. Harper, you've been served. You need to vacate this property.
Vacate? This is my land.
Not anymore. You have 1 hour.
Show me the order. Verify it.
The gravel road threw dust like a warning. 2 sheriff's SUVs crested the hill and rolled down toward the farmhouse, in slow formation, lights off, but moving with the quiet confidence of people who expected the world to get out of their way. On the porch, Ezekiel Harper, everybody called him Zeke, set his coffee down so carefully you would have thought the mug mattered more than his own heartbeat. He watched the vehicles approach the way farmers watch weather, not with panic, with calculation. The morning sun was already hot, pressing down on the soy rows like a heavy hand. A tractor idled near the barn, its engine ticking softly, waiting for the day's work. Zeke was in mud-stained boots and a faded cap that said, Harper Family Farm, in cracked lettering. His hands looked like they'd been built from rope. He stepped off the porch and met the deputies halfway. Deputy Colton Voss got out first, late 30s, hard eyes, a posture that didn't ask questions. It delivered outcomes. He held a folder in one hand like it was a weapon. Mr. Harper, Voss said. Zeke's jaw tightened. That's me, he replied. Voss flipped the folder open, not to read it, just to display it. You've been served, Voss said. You need to vacate this property. The words landed wrong, not because they were loud, because they were impossible. Zeke blinked once. Vacate? He repeated. This is my land. Voss's mouth curled, not a smile, something colder. Not anymore, he said. Behind Voss, the second deputy stepped out and rested a hand near his belt. Not drawing, not threatening, just signaling. Zeke felt it immediately. This wasn't a conversation. This was a push. He kept his voice calm anyway. Deputy, you're standing on Harper land, Zeke said. My deed is recorded. My taxes are paid. I've got cattle on the back 40 and equipment in that barn. You're in the wrong place. Voss stepped closer. You're the one in the wrong place, he replied. Then he raised his voice, just enough for it to carry across the yard. Pack what you can. You have 1 hour. 1 hour to move a life, to erase a legacy, to surrender land that had outlived generations. And as Zeke stared at the deputy's face, he realized something that would later shape the entire $4.2 million case. Voss wasn't confused. He was certain that this black farmer couldn't possibly own what he stood on, certain that a folder was stronger than a deed, certain that authority was proof. Rewind. Because to understand why this became a $4.2 million loss for the county, you have to understand what land means when you had to fight to keep it. Harper land wasn't just acreage, it was history. Zeke's grandfather had worked this soil under a sharecropping system that never intended for black families to own anything permanent. His father had bought the first 10 acres in the late 70s. Cash stitched together from factory wages and harvest money, then added a little more and a little more. Zeke grew up walking fence lines and learning the names of trees like they were family. He learned early that land is the only thing in America that can hold your story, even when people try to rewrite it. And he also learned that land makes people angry, especially when they believe it should belong to someone else. Zeke didn't inherit a fortune. He inherited work. He inherited bills. He inherited the responsibility of keeping something alive. After high school, he left for a few years. Truck driving, long routes, the kind of job where you spend your life watching other people's towns through a windshield. He came back when his father's health started slipping. He came back when the farm needed hands. And he came back with a promise. This land doesn't get sold. Not while I'm breathing, not while there's a way to keep it. He modernized equipment, negotiated better contracts, learned the language of bank loans and fertilizer prices, built relationships with suppliers who didn't always want to take him seriously, and for years, the farm survived the way farms always survive, by stubbornness. Then the county changed, not slowly, all at once. A new highway exit, a logistics warehouse, a developer buying up parcels like a man collecting chess pieces. The paper started calling it growth. Zeke called it pressure, because growth doesn't just bring jobs, it brings hungry eyes. And suddenly, Harperland wasn't just land, it was potential, a term that means we can make more money if you're not on it. The first letter arrived in a white envelope with an expensive logo. Elevation Partners. Zeke opened it at his kitchen table under a ceiling fan that always squeaked on the third speed. The letter said the company was exploring opportunities and wanted to discuss acquisition. There was a number. There was a figure. It was more money than Zeke had ever seen on paper. Tucked underneath was a sentence that didn't sound like an offer. It sounded like a warning. We hope to reach an agreement without delay. Zeke folded the letter and set it aside. He didn't call. He didn't negotiate. He threw it in a drawer like it was junk mail. A week later, a man in a clean truck drove up the driveway and introduced himself as Sam from Elevation. Sam wore jeans that had never seen mud. He smiled too much. He praised the beautiful land. He said things like, "Think of your family's future." Zeke listened, then said, "My family's future is planted out back." Sam's smile tightened. "Well," he said, still soft, "sometimes these things don't stay simple." Zeke watched the truck leave and felt the shift. That wasn't sales. That was pressure. Over the next month, the pressure changed form. A county notice about a setback violation on a storage shed that had been there for 15 years. A complaint about agricultural runoff filed by a neighbor who had never complained before. A surprise inspection. Then another. Little paper cuts. The kind that don't kill you immediately, but make you bleed slow. Zeke kept records. He always did. He saved notices. He took photos. He documented conversations. Because when you've been questioned your whole life, you learn to build proof. Then came the survey. A county survey crew showed up at the edge of his property and started placing flags. Zeke walked out and asked what they were doing. One of the men shrugged. "County project," he said. "What project?" Zeke asked. The man glanced at another. "Easement review," he replied. Zeke frowned. "No one contacted me," he said. "Talk to the courthouse," the man muttered. And that's when Zeke realized the fight wasn't going to stay at his mailbox. It was some moving into offices, into systems, into places where paper can decide who belongs. On the Monday before the deputies came, Zeke drove to the courthouse, not because he liked it, because he'd learned long ago that ignoring paper is how paper becomes a weapon. He walked into the land records office, fluorescent lights, carpet that smelled like old coffee, and asked to see his parcel file. The clerk pulled it up on a screen. Then she frowned. "That's strange," she said. Zeke's stomach tightened. "What's strange?" the clerk clicked. "Your parcel is showing a pending action," she said. Zeke's jaw clenched. "What action?" The clerk hesitated. "Tax delinquency," she said. Zeke stared. "That's impossible," he replied. "I pay my taxes every year. I have receipts." The clerk shifted uncomfortably. "Well," she said, "the system shows delinquent for last year." Zeke pulled out his folder, because of course he had one, and placed a receipt on the counter. Paid, stamped, dated. The clerk blinked. "Huh," she said. Zeke felt the air go thin. "Huh, isn't an answer," he said. The clerk clicked again. Then she said something that made Zeke's blood turn cold. "It looks like your payment was applied to a different parcel number," she admitted. Zeke stared. "A different parcel?" She nodded slowly. "Clerical error," she said. "Clerical error. That phrase is polite. It's also lethal, because a clerical error can take your land if no one corrects it in time. Zeke demanded to speak to the supervisor. The supervisor came out, tight smile, nervous eyes, and assured Zeke they would correct the record. Zeke asked how long. The supervisor said, "A few days." Zeke asked if any enforcement actions had been triggered. The supervisor said, No, don't worry." Zeke left the courthouse with a copy of his receipt and a knot in his stomach, because he knew something the supervisor didn't have to say. The system had already moved, and systems don't stop just because you say, "Wait." Now return to the morning the deputies arrived. Colton Voss stood in Zeke's yard, holding a folder that, in his mind, was stronger than Zeke's entire life. Zeke asked to see the document. Voss lifted it like a trophy. "It's an eviction order," he said. "From who?" Zeke demanded. Voss's eyes narrowed. "County Court," he replied. Zeke stepped closer. "Then show me the judge's signature," he said. Voss scoffed. "You don't get to dictate procedure," he replied. Zeke's voice sharpened. "I'm not dictating," he said. "I'm verifying, because this is my land." Voss's jaw tightened. "You're trespassing," he said. Zeke stared. He laughed once, short and humorless. "Deputy," he said, "I was born on this land." Voss didn't blink. "That doesn't mean anything," he replied, and there it was, the heart of the case, not law, not paperwork, dismissal. Zeke looked past Voss and saw, parked farther down the road near the tree line, a white SUV with tinted windows, not a deputy vehicle, not marked, just sitting there, watching. Zeke felt something crawl up his spine. "Who's that?" he asked. Voss didn't turn. "Not your concern," he said, but it was Zeke's concern, because Zeke knew the smell of a setup. He pulled out his phone, not to film for entertainment, to protect reality. "For the record," he said, speaking clearly, "this is Ezekiel Harper. You're on my property. I have my deed. I have my tax receipts. I'm requesting you verify this before you attempt to remove me." Voss's eyes flashed. "Put the phone away," he snapped. Zeke didn't. "No," he said. "You're not going to rewrite this." Voss took a step closer. "You want to get arrested on your own land?" he asked. Zeke stared. "I want you to do your job correctly," he replied. That sentence hit Voss like an insult, because men who equate authority with respect don't like being corrected, not by anyone, especially not by someone they already decided doesn't belong. Voss's hand moved toward his cuffs, and Zeke's farm, open sky, quiet fields, birds overhead, suddenly felt like a trap. A voice cut in. "Deputy," someone called from the barn. It was Zeke's nephew, Leon, early 20s, hands greasy from working on the tractor. He had his phone out, recording. "Sir," Voss barked, "get back." Leon didn't move. "This is our land," Leon said. "What are you doing?" Voss stepped toward Leon. "You're interfering," he snapped. Zeke raised a hand. "Leon, stay back," he said, calm but urgent. "Just record," because Zeke understood the rule of conflict. The record matters more than the argument. Voss turned back to Zeke. "Last warning," he said. "You have 1 hour to vacate. If you're still here, you'll be removed." Zeke's voice went low. "I'm not leaving," he said. Voss's eyes narrowed. "Then you're choosing the hard way," he replied. The deputies walked back to their SUVs, not leaving, just repositioning, like predators circling. That hour was the longest hour of Zeke's life, not because he was packing, because he was preparing. He went inside. He pulled his deed from the safe. He pulled tax receipts. He pulled a copy of the survey plat. He called his attorney, an older man named Walter Henson, a local land lawyer who'd helped Zeke's family for years. Walter listened. Then he said, "Do not leave. Do not touch them. Keep recording. I'm driving out." Zeke hung up and looked out the window. The deputies' SUVs were still there, and the unmarked white SUV near the tree line hadn't moved. When Walter arrived, dust trailing behind his truck, the scene changed. Walter stepped, out in a pressed shirt, tie loosened, carrying a briefcase like a shield. He walked up to Deputy Voss with calm authority. "Deputy," he said, "I'm Walter Henson. I represent Mr. Harper. Show me your order." Voss's posture stiffened. "This doesn't concern you," he said. Walter didn't blink. "It concerns me now," he replied, "because you're attempting to evict my client from his own land. If you have a lawful order, you'll show it." Voss's eyes narrowed. He flipped the folder open. Walter leaned in and read. His expression changed. Not confusion, recognition. "That's not an eviction," Walter said quietly. Voss's jaw tightened. "It's a writ," he snapped. Walter shook his head. "That's a notice of tax sale proceedings," he said, "and it's addressed to the wrong parcel." Zeke felt his stomach drop. Wrong parcel. Walter pointed. "This number," he said, tapping the paper, "is not Mr. Harper's land. And, even if it were, you don't evict someone with this. You verify. You go through civil process. You don't show up with deputies and an hour ultimatum." Voss's face hardened. "Not my problem," he said. "My job is to enforce." Walter's voice sharpened. "Your job is to enforce lawful orders," he said. "This is not one." Here's the moment that would become the major twist later. Because while Walter argued legalities, Zeke watched Deputy Voss's eyes flick toward the unmarked SUV. Not once, twice, a habit, a check-in, like Voss was making sure someone was watching. Zeke leaned toward Leon. "Zoom in on that SUV," he whispered. Leon did, and on Leon's phone, you could see a man inside. Sunglasses, button-down shirt, not law enforcement. He was holding a clipboard, like this was an inspection, like this was a transaction. Walter demanded a supervisor. Voss scoffed. Walter dialed the sheriff's office himself and requested a lieutenant. Minutes passed. Then another county vehicle arrived. Lieutenant Rosa Kincaid stepped out, mid-40s, no-nonsense eyes. She took one look at Walter, then at Zeke, then at Voss. "What's happening?" she asked. Voss spoke fast, already building narrative. "Tax delinquent property," he said. "Owner refusing to vacate. We're enforcing the writ." Walter cut in. "Lieutenant," he said, "that document is not an eviction. It references the wrong parcel, and my client has receipts showing his taxes were paid. Your office is here based on a clerical error." Kincaid's eyes narrowed. She looked at the paper, then at Zeke. "Mr. Harper," she asked, "do you have proof of payment?" Zeke held up the folder. Walter handed it over. Kincaid read. Silence. Her expression tightened. Then she looked at Voss. "Colton," she said quietly, "why are you here with an hour ultimatum?" Voss's jaw clenched. "It's procedure," he muttered. Kincaid's eyes sharpened. "No," she said. "It's not." Voss's face flushed, and in that moment, you could see it. Not a misunderstanding. A deputy caught in something. Kincaid turned toward the unmarked SUV. "Who is that?" she asked. Voss didn't answer. Kincaid's voice rose. "I asked you a question." Voss's shoulders tightened. That's county assessor," he said. Zeke stared. County assessor. On his land. During an eviction. That's not normal. That's not procedure. That's coordination. Kincaid walked toward the unmarked SUV. The man inside stepped out slowly. He introduced himself as a consultant for the assessor's office, but he wasn't carrying a county badge. He was carrying a folder with Elevation Partners logo stamped on the corner. Leon's camera caught it. Clear as day. Elevation, on county business, on Zeke's land. Zeke felt the world tilt. So this wasn't just a clerical error. This was a pipeline, paper misapplied, a land record flagged, an enforcement action triggered, and a developer's representative ready to document the vacated property. Kincaid turned back to Voss. "Deputy," she said, voice sharp now, "step away." Voss didn't move immediately. Kincaid repeated it. "Step away, now." Voss stepped back. Small movement, big admission. Kincaid looked at Walter. "Mr. Henson," she said, "I'm halting this action pending verification. Mr. Harper is not to be removed." Walter nodded. "Thank you," he said. Zeke didn't thank anyone. He couldn't. Not with the damage already done. Not with his land treated like a mistake. Not with a developer's folder on his grass. The deputies left. But the story didn't. Because Zeke's phones, Leon's camera, the farm's driveway camera, Walter's dash cam, had captured something the county could not explain away. Not just a bad decision. A pattern, a connection, and a deputy whose certainty looked less like instinct and more like instruction. For the next 2 weeks, Zeke lived inside paperwork. He went to the courthouse. He demanded corrections. He filed affidavits. Walter filed emergency motions. The county quietly fixed the tax record. Clerical error resolved, as if that erased the moment deputies came to evict a man from his own land. But Zeke wasn't satisfied, because the record wasn't just wrong, it had been used, weaponized, and someone had tried to profit from it. The county tried to contain the incident. They suggested Zeke misunderstood the nature of the visit. They said the deputies were there to verify occupancy. They said no eviction occurred. They said no harm was done. But Zeke's attorney didn't argue about what didn't happen. He argued about what almost happened, and what was threatened, and what was recorded. Because in civil rights cases, a threat, backed by authority, is not harmless. It is coercion. Then the lawsuit was filed, not just against Deputy Voss, against the county, against the sheriff's office, against the assessor's office, for constitutional violations, for unlawful seizure attempts, for discriminatory enforcement, for due process violations, and for damages, because even though Zeke was not physically removed, the attempt had consequences. One of his largest buyers temporarily suspended a contract after hearing legal issues with the farm. A lender asked questions. A crop insurance adjuster flagged the property, and Zeke's family, people who had survived everything, spent nights awake wondering if the system would come back with something stronger. That fear is harm. That instability is harm. And the law, at its best, recognizes that. Now here's where the case took its sharpest turn. Discovery. Because discovery is the moment a lawsuit stops being a story and becomes an X-ray. Emails, texts, calendars, meeting notes. Walter requested communications between the assessor's office and elevation partners. The county resisted. Then a judge ordered production. And when the documents arrived, the clerical error excuse collapsed, because there were emails discussing Harper land, not by parcel number, by name. Harper Tract, one email called it. There were messages about accelerating acquisition, messages about pressure points, messages about tax status irregularities, and one message, quiet, casual, devastating, mentioned that a deputy could encourage voluntary departure. Voluntary departure. From your own land, because a deputy shows up and makes it feel like leaving is the only safe option. That's not voluntary. That's coercion dressed as procedure. The county tried to argue the developer's representative was just observing. Walter argued that observation during an enforcement action is coordination. He argued that a deputy whose job is neutral enforcement had been pulled into a private agenda. And he argued bluntly that the entire thing smelled like old American theft. Not with guns, with paper. At this point, a question is worth asking. If you had been in Zeke's boots, standing on land your family worked for, watching deputies threaten to remove you, would you have left just to keep your family safe? A lot of people would. That's why the tactic works. That's why it's dangerous. And that's why the case mattered. Because it wasn't about one farm. It was about a method. The trial never reached a jury verdict in the public way people imagine. Because the county didn't want that. Not with emails, not with footage, not with the developer's logo on camera, not with a black farmer as plaintiff, calm, credible, and backed by clear documentation, not with a deputy recorded dismissing proof, and definitely not with a lieutenant asking, on tape, "Why are you here with an hour ultimatum?" That question is poison in front of a jury, because it implies motive. Negotiations intensified. The county offered smaller numbers. Walter refused, not because Zeke was chasing a jackpot, because Zeke was chasing a record. He wanted a public acknowledgement. He wanted policy changes. He wanted assurances that land records couldn't be misapplied in a way that triggered armed enforcement. He wanted accountability for the deputy who tried to use an invalid document like a crowbar. And he wanted something deeper. He wanted the county to admit that a black man's ownership was treated as optional until proven otherwise. Eventually, the county settled. $4.2 million. It came with the usual language. No admission of wrongdoing, resolving claims, moving forward. But money doesn't move forward. Money speaks. It says, "We believe a jury might punish us." It says, "The record is too damaging." It says, "The IZ, cheapest way out is to pay." And in this case, the county paid not because Zeke was loud, because Zeke was documented. The settlement included reforms, a mandatory verification protocol before any deputy enforces civil tax actions on property, a requirement that land record discrepancies be resolved administratively before enforcement, a prohibition on third-party observers, especially private developers, being present during county enforcement actions, a transparency rule requiring the assessor's office to disclose communications with entities seeking acquisition of land involved in enforcement, and a joint review board to audit clerical errors that affect property rights. Because an error isn't just an error when it consistently harms certain people, then it becomes a pattern. And patterns are policy. Deputy Colton Voss didn't stand on the courthouse steps and confess. People like Voss rarely do. But he didn't stay the same either. He was reassigned, disciplined, removed from civil enforcement operations. And internally, the sheriff's office treated the incident like a contamination, something that revealed too much about how easily a badge can be used to advance private interests. Zeke kept farming. That part matters, because the easiest victory for pressure is displacement. If you leave, the land becomes available. If you give up, the system learns it works. Zeke didn't. He planted. He harvested. He rebuilt trust with buyers. He installed more cameras. He marked his boundary lines with fresh posts, not because he needed them for himself, because he needed them for the next person who might come with a folder and an attitude. When the dust finally settled, a local reporter asked Zeke what the worst part was. He didn't say the threats. He didn't say the deputy's tone. He didn't even say the unmarked SUV with a developer's logo. He said something quieter. The worst part, Zeke replied, was realizing I had to prove I own what my family built. He paused. Land is supposed to be the one thing you can stand on, he continued. But that morning, the way he looked at me, it was like he thought my ownership was a suggestion. That sentence is the entire case. Ownership treated like a suggestion, because someone's certainty outweighed verification. And that brings us back to the beginning. 2 SUVs, a dusty road, a deputy holding a folder like a weapon, an hour ultimatum. In that moment, the county revealed how fragile rights can be when the system decides you don't belong. Zeke didn't win because he was lucky. He won because he documented, because he refused to leave, because he demanded verification, because he had an attorney who knew the difference between procedure and coercion, and because cameras, silent, unblinking, kept recording when people with authority wished they weren't. If you take one thing from this story, let it be this. Land theft doesn't always look like violence. Sometimes it looks like paperwork, a parcel number, a payment applied to the wrong account, a clerical error that just happens to create leverage, and a deputy who thinks his certainty is enough to push you off what you own. Zeke Harper stood on his land and said no. Not loudly, not theatrically, just firmly. He refused to surrender his legacy to someone else's assumption, and when the county tried to call it a misunderstanding, the record told the truth. So the county paid $4.2 million. Not because money can replace dignity, because money is the only language institutions reliably understand when a camera proves they were wrong. The tractor kept idling, the fields kept stretching toward the horizon, and the porch, where Zeke set his coffee down and watched the SUVs arrive, became something else. Not just the entrance to a farmhouse. A line, a boundary, a place where a black farmer refused to be evicted from his own land and forced a county to learn that verification is not optional, especially when power is standing on someone else's soil.